Hi, hello, welcome back. My name's Cooper. I'm a painter with over 15 years of experience working towards my MFA at Stanford University. And today, we're going to talk about how you can use composition to take your artwork from good to great. Let's get to it. In art, when we talk about composition, what we're really saying is how does the placement of our objects, visuals, figures help our viewer understand the artwork? How does their eye move through the piece? So let's start with the basics. The basics when it comes to composition is understanding the rule of thirds. And what that means is we can use a 3x3 grid to section off parts of our picture plane. The picture plane is just the image itself, everything the viewer has to look at in terms of the artwork. So we break it into thirds by using simple lines, and you'll have 9 squares total. And what that will do is it will give you the opportunity to put interesting things at those intersections for your viewer's eye to move. So what does that mean? Here's an image of mine, a painting I finished recently, and I'll show you how in your photos you can edit it and you can actually manipulate the grid and you can use that to place things at those intersections. So let's go into our edit on our photo. And as you can see, when I grab the crop tool and I start moving around the corners, the grid appears and there's intersections at each of these cubes as it's split into 9, and I can use that to change the aspect ratio or the dimensions of the image and also align things at those intersections, which is actually really useful because it allows us really quickly to change our source photos and make them suitable images for more dynamic artwork. Here's an example of what that can look like. So with these red grid, I'm showing you 9 squares. We've broken our image into sections, and at each of these intersections, more or less, they line up with the grid, and you can see that the eye of my figure on the bottom left is there, and the floor almost lines up to it, as well as the gray figure on the top left and the red box on the bottom left. So we give our viewer a way to move their eye around and place interesting things at these intersections. So those are the basics. But we can think more intentionally about how we want our viewer's eye to move around the picture plane. So if we have a basic picture plane, figure 5 on the left here, we can start to think about how we can use simple lines and moves with our tools to guide our viewer's eye through the visual plane. So think about this as taking your viewer's eye and asking them to go on a little roller coaster ride. So in figure 7, you can see the viewer's eye is going to follow this line up the slope and then down again. And once we get a little more complicated with figure 8 here, starting from A and going around and up and down and over and around to B and on this little zig and zag to C and all the way around to D, we're moving our viewer's eye around the picture plane to make a more dynamic viewing experience. Otherwise, they look at something that's quite static, they look at it quickly, and they leave. We want them to spend as much time as possible with our rich imagery that we spent so much time developing with our skill set. Now, how do we apply this to looking at art and about complicated imagery? So here's a painting by a very gifted painter named Nicole Eisenman, and the reason this is such a good painting and how it's so well composed is because Nicole gives us a lot to go on in terms of using line and movement to move our eye around. And how she does this is using lines, color, and positive and negative space. Positive space is the figures, and the negative space is the resulting gaps, the shapes that are in the gaps between figures, and so on. So how she does this is she uses lines to move our eyes around the picture plane, like we talked about. So first she uses horizontal and diagonal lines here, right? So if I toggle back and then forth, you can see how these lines with a couch and with a table can move our eyes back and forth. So already she gives us a lot to go on, but she also uses vertical lines, slanted and vertical ones, to move our eye up and down. So the resulting sort of visual logic that she employs gives us a lot of room to move our eye around and a lot to look at in the piece without getting stuck in any one section. I also want to share some principles from a great book by William Mortensen called The Command to Look, and it's all about how you can use psychology and technical approaches to guide your viewer's eye through the artwork to give you more dynamic images. So first we're going to talk about the diagonal. Here is a painting by Winslow Homer, one of his many seascapes, as they're called, where he has a rower in a rowboat rowing and looking over his shoulder with his fresh catch. So you can tell that the boat itself is composed in such a way that it's diagonal. So we're cutting the picture plane in half and giving our viewer a way for their eye to cut across the middle of the picture plane. He also gives us the actual oars. So there's sort of an X shape that's formed here. So our eye can move back and forth without getting stuck. And he's such a great painter that he also reinforces that diagonal quality with other smaller lines in the piece. He implies other diagonals that give a sense of visual consistency. So that's the diagonal. The next thing we want to think about is the S-curve. The S-curve allows us to move our eye back and forth and sort of meandering like a snake across the picture plane. So here's a painting by a painter named Francis Bacon. And you can see there's a swooping and there's a pushing back and forth, and there's a general sense that there's an S. There's a push and a pull that moves our eye around the picture plane. Here's another image where you can see it's less literal. It's not quite an S, but you can see that there's ways where the angel wings and the hair and the wing of the figure and the arm and the legs move our eye back and forth and back and forth. So we have a general sense of an S, or at least a meandering sort of logic to the picture plane. So that's the S curve. The next one is the triangle combination. Triangle combination is a pretty common one, and it's a really quick way for you to allow your viewer's eye to move back and forth. So here's a really famous painting named The Raft of the Medusa, and I want you to look at it for a moment and tell me how many triangles you see. So we've got the rigging, the ropes of the actual raft, and we have the wood planks, but there are other implied ones that I want you to check out too. So take a moment and tell me how many you think you can find, and then I'm going to count them up. So on the bottom left, we've got 1. On the bottom right, we've got 2. Then we've got a third one, and a fourth one with the rigging, and then a fifth one. And I can even find more, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But you can see how our eye can move around with all these triangles interacting, giving us a dynamic sense of space. So that's the triangle combination. We combine multiple triangles to hold our viewer's interest. The last one we're going to talk about is this idea of the dominant mass. Now, William Mortensen was a photographer, so I'm going to show you just a couple of his actual photographs in which he uses images with dark colors to give these dominant large shapes. In this case, it's the garments and it's the body of the figures that he photographed to really ground the images with these dominant shapes. So that is the dominant mass. Now, knowing all of this, we can start to think about how we're going to put this into practice for our own artwork. So when we're combining compositional principles, we can think about ways to put them together, to use one and lean on the others, and how all the different ways we can move our viewer's eye around the picture plane. So recall this Winslow Homer painting that we saw. I made my own version of it, where I flipped the composition. I kept the fish, but I flipped the composition and I put my own avatar in the space and put my own visual thumbprint on it. So in here, we can see I used the X and the diagonal that Winslow Homer used. I also used the implied sort of curve of the boat and of the sky and of the clouds to move the viewer's eye around. The use of triangles, the triangle combination. I employ the triangle combination there. And the last thing we do is we think about the S-curve. How can we go back and forth using the environment and the figure? So it's not exact, but you can see that there's a moving, like you can use the environment and the figure and the objects in your picture plane to move the eye back and forth, just to give your viewer as many ways as possible to move their eye around the picture plane to make for a dynamic image. So now that we're familiar with these compositional rules of thumb, we can start to think about how to apply these ideas to our own artwork. And the main thing you really need to focus on is how we can move our viewer's eye through the work continuously. Something I didn't cover that I want to show you real quick is thinking about moving your viewer's eye in a circle. So we can do that with lines and shapes. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or particular. So here's a painting of mine called Thought Vessel. in which my avatar is sitting on the bed in their sanctuary, pondering what's to come with their life. And so you can see I've used the line of light through the window to create a triangle shape and cut across the canvas, and then we use the line from the doorway to go down, and then the cast light on the floor creates a line that goes down, and then we have a cane here on the floor, so we can follow that down here, and then the bed pulls us around, goes up, over, and our eye can follow the line from the window up. It can go across all the way over there, and it can go down again, and then over and down. So just think about how you can use small things, little things, to generally draw your viewer's eye in a circle. And the longer we can keep them focused on moving their eye around the picture plane, the more they're going to get out of the artwork. It's hard to get a viewer to commit to the long look, which is looking at an artwork more than just a few moments. But if you can do that, you can really create a special connection with your viewer and your work. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. See you next time.